The Red-Headed League. One autumn afternoon, I visited my friend Sherlock Holmes. He was deep in conversation with a large, red-haired man. I apologized for interrupting, but Holmes pulled me into the room and closed the door. "You couldn't have arrived at a better time, Watson," he said, smiling. "I thought you were busy." "I am, very much so. This is, Mr. Wilson, my partner in many of my most successful cases. He'll be helpful in yours, too," Holmes explained. Mr. Wilson nodded, his small eyes peering from behind his round face. "Have a seat," Holmes gestured towards the sofa. "You know, Watson, we both love the unusual. You even write about my adventures, embellishing them a bit," he chuckled. "Your cases are fascinating," I agreed. "Remember when we solved the simple mystery of Miss Mary Sutherland? I said that for real excitement, we need to look at real life. It's more thrilling than any story," Holmes said. "I disagreed at the time," I admitted. "But you'll have to come around to my way of thinking, Watson. I'll keep piling facts on you until you have to admit I'm right. Now, Mr. Wilson, please continue your story. I want to hear every detail. Usually, I can use past cases to solve new ones, but this one is truly unique." Mr. Wilson puffed up his chest, feeling a little proud. He pulled out a crumpled newspaper from his coat pocket. As he read the advertisement column, I examined him closely, trying to understand him like Holmes. But Mr. Wilson seemed quite ordinary. He looked like a typical British businessman, overweight, pompous, and slow. His clothes were worn and drab, with nothing special about them except a brass chain with a strange metal ornament. The only unusual thing was his bright red hair and the grumpy expression on his face. Holmes noticed me observing Mr. Wilson. Beyond the obvious, he's done manual labor, takes snuff, is a Freemason, has been to China, and writes a lot. I can't tell anything else," he said with a smile. Mr. Wilson jumped up, pointing at the newspaper but looking at Holmes. "How did you know all that, Mr. Holmes? How did you know I worked with my hands?" "Your hands, my dear sir. Your right hand is much bigger than your left. You've worked with it, and the muscles are stronger." "And the snuff? And the Freemasonry?" "I won't insult your intelligence by explaining those. You even wear a Freemason pin against the rules of your order," Holmes said. "Ah, of course. I forgot. But the writing? Look at your cuffs. The right one is shiny, and the left one has a smooth patch near the elbow where you rested on your desk. Well, but China? The fish tattooed on your wrist could only be done in China. I've studied tattoos, and even written about them. The way they color the scales pink is unique to China. And the Chinese coin on your chain confirms it." Mr. Wilson laughed. "I thought you were clever, but I guess it was just observation." "I think I'm making a mistake explaining, Watson," Holmes said. "It's the mystery that makes people admire it. My reputation will suffer if I'm so open. Can you find the advertisement, Mr. Wilson?" "Here it is," Wilson said, pointing at the newspaper. "This is where it all began. Read it yourself." I took the paper and read, "To the Red-Headed League. On account of the bequest of the late Ezekiah Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, there is now another vacancy open which entitles a member of the League to a salary of £4 a week for purely nominal services. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Ross at the offices of the League, 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street." "What on earth is this?" I exclaimed, rereading the strange announcement. Holmes chuckled, shifting in his chair. "It's a bit unusual, isn't it? Now, Mr. Wilson, tell us about yourself, your home, and what happened after you saw this advertisement." "Well, it's just like I said," Mr. Wilson wiped his brow. I run a small pawnbroker's shop in Coburg Square. Business hasn't been good lately, so I only have one assistant. He's willing to work for half wages to learn the trade. What's his name? Asked Holmes. Vincent Spaulding. He's not really a young man. He's clever and could earn twice as much elsewhere. But he's happy, so I don't want to tempt him. Sounds like you're lucky to have such a good employee. Not common these days, Holmes remarked. He has his faults, Mr. Wilson admitted. He loves photography, snapping pictures instead of learning, and hiding in the cellar to develop them. It's his only problem, but he's a hard worker. Is he still with you? Yes, sir. He and a girl who cooks and cleans. That's all I have in the house since I'm a widower. We live quietly. Then that advertisement appeared. Tell us about it, Holmes urged. Spaulding came down to the office 8 weeks ago with this very newspaper and said, I wish I was a red-headed man. Why? I asked. There's a vacancy in the Red-Headed League. It's worth a fortune, and there are more vacancies than men. If my hair was red, I'd have a good job. He told me about the league. Apparently, it was founded by a rich American named Ezekiel Hopkins. He was red-headed and loved all red-haired men. When he died, he left his money for a league to help redheads find easy jobs. It's good pay and little work. But there must be millions of redheads, I pointed out. Not so many, really. It's only for Londoners and grown men. Hopkins started in London, and he wanted to help the city. And you have to have bright, fiery red hair. You'd fit right in, Mr. Wilson. But maybe it's not worth the trouble for a few £100, Spaulding explained. My hair is a very bright red, Mr. Wilson said. It seemed like a good chance. And Spaulding knew so much about it that I thought he might be useful. So I closed the shop and went with him to the address. What a sight, Mr. Wilson exclaimed. From all over London, every man with a hint of red hair had come. Fleet Street was packed, and Pope's Court looked like a market. I never thought there were so many redheads. There were all sorts of reds: straw, orange, brick, liver, but not many like mine. I was ready to give up, but Spaulding wouldn't let me. He pushed and pulled until we reached the office. Your story is truly entertaining, Holmes said, taking a pinch of snuff. Please, go on. The office was just 2 chairs and a table. A small man with even redder hair than mine was behind the desk. He spoke to each candidate, but always found a reason to reject them. Getting the job wasn't easy. But when it was our turn, he was much more interested in me. He closed the door and said, This is Mr. Jabez Wilson, and he wants the job. He's perfect for it, the man said. He's got everything I need. I can't remember seeing such fine hair. He stepped back, looked at my hair, and made me blush. Then he rushed forward, shook my hand, and congratulated me. It would be unfair to hesitate, but I need to make sure this is your real hair. He grabbed my hair and pulled so hard I screamed. You have water in your eyes. Everything's fine. But we've been fooled by wigs and even paint before. I could tell you stories about fake hair that would disgust you. He shouted out the window that the vacancy was filled. Everyone groaned and left until there was only me and the manager left. My name is Mr. Duncan Ross, he said. I'm a pensioner from the fund our benefactor left. Are you married, Mr. Wilson? Do you have a family? I said no. He looked unhappy. That's very serious. I'm sorry to hear that. The fund was meant to help redheads have families and support them. It's unfortunate you're a bachelor. I was worried I wouldn't get the job, but he thought about it and said it would be fine. For others, it might be a problem, but we have to make an exception for someone with your hair. When can you start? It's a bit tricky because I have my shop, I said. "Don't worry about that," Spaulding said. "I can look after it for you." "What are the hours?" I asked. 10 to 2. That suited me because I'm busiest in the evenings. My assistant is reliable, so I knew he'd take care of everything. "That's perfect," I said. "And the pay?" £4 a week. "And the work?" "It's purely nominal." "What do you mean?" "You need to be in the office, or at least the building, the whole time. If you leave, you lose the job forever. The will is very clear about that. You have to stay, or you lose everything." "It's only 4 hours a day, and I wouldn't think of leaving," I said. "No excuses are allowed," Duncan Ross said. "Not sickness, business, or anything. You must stay, or you're fired." "And the work?" "You have to copy the Encyclopedia Britannica. The first volume is in that cabinet. You need your own ink, pens, and paper, but we provide the table and chair. Ready tomorrow?" "Yes," I said. "Goodbye, Mr. Jabez Wilson. Congratulations on your new job." He bowed me out. I went home with Spaulding, not knowing what to say. I was so happy. "But then," Mr. Wilson continued, "I spent the whole day thinking about it and felt worried. It seemed like a big hoax or fraud. Why would someone leave all that money for someone to copy a book?" Spaulding tried to cheer me up, but by bedtime I was convinced it was all a joke. However, in the morning, I decided to see what would happen, so I bought some ink, a pen, and paper, and went to Pope's Court. To my surprise, everything was fine. The table was ready, and Mr. Ross was there to make sure I started working. He gave me the letter A to start with, and then left me, checking on me every now and then. At 2 o'clock, he said goodbye, complimented me on how much I'd written, and locked the office door behind me. This went on every day. On Saturday, the manager paid me 4 gold coins for my week's work. The next week, and the week after, it was the same. I was there every morning at 10 and left at 2. After a while, Mr. Ross only came in once a morning, and then stopped coming altogether. But I never left the room, not even for a minute. I was afraid of losing the job, and it was so good that I didn't want to risk it. 8 weeks passed, and I had written about abbots, archery, armor, architecture, Attica, and hoped to get to the letter B soon. I'd filled a whole shelf with my writings, and then, suddenly, it all ended. "Ended?" I asked. "Yes, sir, this morning. I went to work as usual at 10, but the door was locked with a piece of cardboard nailed to it. Here it is." Mr. Wilson held up a piece of cardboard that read, "The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9th, 1890. Holmes and I stared at the notice, and Mr. Wilson's sad face. The funny side of the story was so strong that we burst into laughter. "There's nothing funny about it!" Mr. Wilson shouted, his face turning red. "If you can't take me seriously, I'll go somewhere else." "No, no." Holmes pushed him back into his chair. "I wouldn't miss your case for the world. It's wonderfully unusual, but there's something a little amusing about it. What did you do when you found the notice on the door?" "I was shocked, sir. I didn't know what to do. I went to the other offices, but no one knew anything. Then I went to the landlord, an accountant. I asked him about the Red-Headed League, but he had never heard of it. Then I asked him about Mr. Duncan Ross. He said he didn't know him either." "Well," I said, "the gentleman at number 4. "The red-headed man?" he asked. "Yes." "Oh," he said. "His name was William Morris. He was a lawyer using my room until his new office was ready. He moved out yesterday." "Where can I find him?" "At his new office. He gave me the address." 17 in King Edward Street, near St. Paul's. I went there, Mr. Holmes, but it was a fake leg factory, and no one had heard of Mr. Morris or Mr. Ross. "And then?" asked Holmes. "I went home, and Spaulding couldn't help me. He just said to wait for a letter. But I didn't want to lose the job without a fight. So, I came to you." "You did the right thing," Holmes said. "Your case is extraordinary, and I'm happy to look into it. It seems more serious than it appears." "Serious enough," Mr. Wilson exclaimed. "I've lost 4 pounds a week." "As far as you're concerned," Holmes said, "you've lost nothing. You've gained 30 pounds and learned a lot about the letter A. The League hasn't hurt you." "No, sir, but I want to know who they are and what they were trying to do. It was a costly joke for them. 32 pounds. "We'll find out, Mr. Wilson. First, a few questions. How long had your assistant, Spaulding, been with you?" "About a month." "How did he find the job?" "He answered an advertisement." "Was he the only applicant?" "No, I had 12. "Why did you choose him?" "He was quick and cheap. He worked for half wages." "What's he like, this Spaulding?" "Small, stout, quick, no beard, but he's not young. He has a white mark on his forehead from acid." Holmes sat up straight, excited. "I thought so. Did you notice his ears are pierced for earrings?" "Yes, sir. He said a gypsy did it when he was a kid." Holmes said thoughtfully. "He's still with you?" "Yes, sir. I just left him." "And your business has been fine while you were away?" "Nothing to complain about. Not much to do in the mornings." "That's all, Mr. Wilson. I'll give you my opinion in a day or two. It's Saturday, and hopefully, by Monday, we'll solve this." "Well, Watson," Holmes said after Mr. Wilson left, "what do you think?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It's a very strange case." "Usually," Holmes said, "the more unusual a thing is, the simpler the explanation. It's the ordinary crimes that are hard to solve. But I need to act fast." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Smoke," he said. "This is a 3-pipe problem. Don't talk to me for 50 minutes." He curled up in his chair, his knees pulled up to his nose, eyes closed, and pipe sticking out like a bird's beak. I thought he was asleep, and I was nearly dozing off too, when he suddenly jumped up. "Sarasate is playing at the St. James's Hall this afternoon," he said. "Watson, can you spare a few hours?" "I have nothing to do today. My practice is never too busy." "Then let's go. We'll go through the city first and have lunch on the way. I see there's a lot of German music on the program, which I prefer to Italian or French. It's introspective, and I want to introspect. Let's go." We took the Underground to Aldersgate and then walked to Coburg Square, where Mr. Wilson had his shop. It was a small, dingy square with brick houses and a tiny lawn struggling against the pollution. The shop had 3 gold balls and a sign that said Jabez Wilson in white letters. Holmes stopped in front of the shop, studying it carefully, then walked up and down the street, looking at the houses. Finally, he returned to the pawnbroker's, tapped his stick on the pavement a few times, and knocked on the door. A young man opened the door, clean-shaven and smiling. "Can I help you, sir?" "Just asking for directions to the Strand," Holmes said. "3rd right, 4th left," the assistant said, closing the door. "Smart fellow," Holmes remarked as we walked away. "He's probably the 4th smartest man in London, and for daring, maybe even 3rd. I've met him before." "Obviously," I said. "Mr. Wilson's assistant is important in this mystery. I'm sure you ask it for directions just to see him." "Not him." "What then?" the knees of his trousers. And what did you see? What I expected to see. Why did you tap the pavement? Doctor, this is a time for observation, not talk. We're spies in enemy territory. We know something about Saxe-Coburg Square. Now, let's explore the area behind it. The street we turned onto was completely different from the quiet square. It was a major road carrying all the city's traffic. The street was jammed with carriages and carts, and the sidewalks were crowded with people rushing about. It was hard to believe that these elegant shops and buildings were next to the faded, neglected square we had just left. "Let me see," said Holmes, standing at the corner and looking down the street. "I want to make sure I remember the order of the houses here. It's a hobby of mine to know London well. There's Mortimer's Tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the City and Suburban Bank, the Vegetarian Restaurant, and McFarlane's Carriage Building Depot. That takes us right to the next block. Now, Doctor, we've finished our work, so let's have some fun. A sandwich and coffee, and then off to Violin Land, where it's all beautiful music and harmony. No red-headed clients to give us puzzles." My friend loved music. He was a great performer and a talented composer. All afternoon he sat in the concert hall, completely absorbed in the music, gently moving his long fingers in time. His smiling face and relaxed, dreamy eyes were a far cry from the sharp, determined Sherlock Holmes who solved crimes. It was as if his personality had two sides, with his extreme attention to detail and cleverness being a reaction to his sometimes poetic and thoughtful nature. He would go from being completely relaxed to bursting with energy. And I knew he was most impressive when he had been lounging in his armchair for days, composing music or reading old books. Then, suddenly, his love of the chase would take over, and his brilliant mind would become almost intuitive. People who didn't know him well would think he had supernatural powers. When I saw him so lost in the music that afternoon, I knew that trouble was coming for those he was hunting. "You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor," he said as we left the concert hall. "Yes, that would be best. I have some business to attend to that will take a few hours. This case at Coburg Square is serious." "Why serious?" "A major crime is being planned. I'm sure we can stop it. But today is Saturday, which makes things a bit more difficult. I'll need your help tonight." "What time?" 10 will be early enough. "I'll be at Baker Street at 10. "Very good. And Doctor, there might be some danger, so please bring your revolver." He waved his hand, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. I'm not stupid, but I always felt a bit slow when dealing with Sherlock Holmes. I heard what he heard, saw what he saw, but his words made it clear that he understood what had happened and what was going to happen, while I was still confused. Driving home, I thought about everything. The red-headed man copying the encyclopedia, our visit to Coburg Square, and Holmes's ominous words. What was this nighttime adventure? And why did I need a gun? Where were we going? And what were we going to do? Holmes had hinted that the pawnbroker's assistant was a dangerous man, someone capable of doing terrible things. I tried to figure it out, but gave up and decided to wait until tonight. It was 9:15 when I left home and walked through the park, then down Oxford Street to Baker Street. 2 carriages were waiting outside the house, and as I entered, I heard voices coming from upstairs. In Holmes's room, he was talking to 2 men. One was Peter Jones, the police agent, and the other was a tall, thin man with a sad face, a shiny hat, and a respectable coat. "Ah, everyone's here," said Holmes, putting on his coat and grabbing his walking stick. "Watson, you know Mr. Jones of Scotland Yard, I believe. This is Mr. Merriweather, who will be joining us on our adventure tonight. "We're hunting in pairs again, Doctor," said Jones, pleased with himself. "Our friend here is a great starter of chases. All he needs is a good dog to help him finish the job." "I hope we're not chasing a wild goose," said Mr. Merriweather nervously. "You can trust Mr. Holmes," said Jones confidently. "He has his own ways of doing things, which are a bit too theoretical and strange, but he's a real detective. It's fair to say that a couple of times, like with the Sholto murder and the Agra treasure, he's been right when the police have been wrong." "If you say so, Mr. Jones, then it's all right," said the stranger politely. "Still, I miss my card game. It's the first Saturday night in 27 years that I haven't had my usual game." "I think you'll find," said Sherlock Holmes, "that you're playing for higher stakes tonight than ever before, and the game will be much more exciting. For you, Mr. Merriweather, the stakes are £30,000, and for you, Jones, it's the man you've been after for years. John Clay, the murderer, thief and forger. He's young, Mr. Merriweather, but the best in the business. I'd rather have him in handcuffs than any criminal in London. He's a remarkable man, this John Clay. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he went to Eton and Oxford. He's as smart as he is skillful, and although we see signs of him everywhere, we never find him. He'll rob a house in Scotland one week and raise money for an orphanage in Cornwall the next. I've been chasing him for years and never even seen him. I hope I can introduce you to him tonight. I've had a few encounters with Mr. John Clay myself, and I agree he's the best. But it's past 10 and time to go. You two take the first carriage. Watson and I will follow in the second." Sherlock Holmes was quiet during the long drive, leaning back in the carriage and humming the tunes from the concert. We went through a maze of gas-lit streets until we reached Farrington Street. "We're close now," said Holmes. "Mr. Merriweather is a bank director, and he's personally involved in this. I thought it would be good to have Jones with us. He's not bad, but he's a bit slow when it comes to his job. He has one good quality. He's brave as a bulldog and won't let go once he has someone in his grasp. Here we are, and they're waiting for us." We were back at the busy street we had been in earlier. We got out of the carriages and followed Mr. Merriweather down a narrow passage and through a side door. Inside was a short corridor that ended at a heavy iron gate. We went through the gate and down winding stone steps to another gate. Mr. Merriweather lit a lantern and led us down a dark, earthy passage to a third door and into a large, empty cellar filled with crates and boxes. "You're not very vulnerable from above," Holmes said, looking around with his lantern. "Nor from below," said Mr. Merriweather, tapping his stick on the floor. "It sounds hollow," he said, surprised. "Please be quieter," Holmes said, annoyed. "You've already put the whole plan at risk. Would you please sit down on one of those boxes and don't interfere?" Mr. Merriweather sat on a crate, looking offended, while Holmes got down on his knees and, using his lantern and a magnifying glass, began to examine the cracks between the stones. He was done in a few seconds, put away his glass, and stood up. "We have at least an hour," he said, "because they can't do anything until the pawnbroker is safely in bed. Then they'll act quickly. We're in the cellar of the city branch of a major London bank, Doctor. Mr. Merriweather is the chairman of the board, and he'll explain why some of London's most dangerous criminals would be interested in this cellar." "It's our French gold," whispered the director. "We've had several warnings that someone might try to steal it." "French gold?" I asked. "Yes. A few months ago, we needed more money and borrowed 30,000 Napoleons from the Bank of France. It's been rumored that we haven't unpacked the money, and it's still in the cellar. This crate I'm sitting on has 2,000 Napoleons wrapped in lead foil. We have a lot more gold in this branch than usual, and the board has been worried about it." "For good reason," said Holmes. "Now, it's time to plan. I expect things will happen within an hour. Mr. Merriweather, let's cover this lantern." "And sit in the dark?" "I'm afraid so. I brought a deck of cards, and I thought we could play a game since we have 4 people. But the criminal's preparations are too far along, so we can't risk a light. First, we need to choose our positions. These are daring men, and although we'll catch them by surprise, they could hurt us if we're not careful. I'll stay behind this crate, and you hide behind those. When I flash the light on them, close in quickly. If they shoot, Watson, don't hesitate to shoot back." I put my revolver, loaded, on top of the crate, behind which I crouched. Holmes covered the lantern, leaving us in total darkness. It was the darkest I had ever seen. The smell of hot metal let us know the light was still there, ready to be turned on. I was very nervous, and the sudden darkness, the cold, damp air of the vault, made me feel uneasy. "They have only one way out," whispered Holmes, "back through the house to Saxe-Coburg Square. Jones, did you do as I asked?" "I have an inspector and 2 officers waiting at the front door." "Then we've closed all the exits. Now we need to be quiet and wait." How long we waited, I don't know. Later we figured out it was only an hour and a quarter, but it felt like hours, and I thought dawn would break soon. My legs were stiff and sore because I didn't dare move, but I was so nervous that I could hear everyone breathing, and I could even tell the difference between Jones's heavy breathing and the director's light, sighing breaths. From where I was, I could see the floor. Suddenly, I saw a flash of light. At first, it was just a tiny spark on the stone floor. Then it grew into a yellow line, and then, without a sound, a hole appeared, and a hand emerged, white and almost like a woman's hand, reaching into the pool of light. For a minute or more, the hand, with its twisting fingers, moved in the light. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was withdrawn, leaving only a tiny spark between the stones. But it didn't stay gone for long. With a ripping, tearing sound, one of the large white stones flipped over, leaving a square hole that let out the light from a lantern. A young, sharp-faced man peered over the edge, looking around. Then, using the edge of the hole for support, pulled himself up until his shoulders and then his waist were above the floor. In a moment, he was standing by the hole, pulling up his companion, a thin, pale young man with a shock of bright red hair. "It's clear," he whispered. "Do you have the chisel and the bags? Great Scott! Jump, Archie, jump, and I'll take the blame." Sherlock Holmes had jumped up and grabbed the intruder by the collar. The other dived into the hole, and I heard the sound of tearing fabric as Jones grabbed his coattails. The lantern light shone on the barrel of a revolver, but Holmes's walking stick struck the man's wrist, and the gun fell to the floor. "It's no use, John Clay," said Holmes calmly. "You have no chance." "I see," the man said, perfectly calm. "I think my friend is okay, even though you have his coat." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes. "Oh, really? You've done a good job. I have to give you credit for that." "And I to you," Holmes said. "Your red-headed idea was very clever and new." "You'll see your friend soon," said Jones. "He's better at climbing down holes than I am. Just hold still while I put on the handcuffs." "I beg that you don't touch me with your dirty hands," said our prisoner as the handcuffs clicked on his wrists. "You might not know that I have royal blood in my veins, and please use 'sir' when you talk to me." "All right," said Jones, staring and snickering. "Would you please, sir, march upstairs, where we can get a carriage to take your highness to the police station?" "That's better," said John Clay calmly. He bowed to us and walked off with the detective. "Mr. Holmes," said Mr. Merriweather as we followed them out of the cellar, "I do not know how the bank can thank you. You've stopped one of the most daring bank robberies I've ever seen." "I had a few scores to settle with Mr. John Clay," said Holmes. "This has cost me a little money, which I expect the bank to reimburse, but that's okay. This was a unique experience, and I learned a lot from the Red-Headed League story. You see, Watson," he explained as we sat in Baker Street over a drink, "it was clear from the start that the only reason for this strange league and the encyclopedia copying was to get the pawnbroker out of the way for several hours a day. It was a strange way to do it, but hard to think of a better one. Clay got the idea from the color of his accomplice's hair. The £4 a week was a good bribe, and they were playing for much bigger amounts. They put the advertisement in the paper, one criminal got the temporary office, and the other persuaded the pawnbroker to apply. Together, they made sure he was away every morning. As soon as I heard the assistant was paid half wages, I knew he had a strong reason for taking the job." "But how did you guess why?" "If there had been women in the house, I would have thought it was just a simple affair. But that wasn't the case. The pawnbroker's business was small, and nothing in his house could explain such elaborate preparations and expense. It had to be something outside the house. What could it be? I thought about the assistant's love of photography and how he always disappeared in the cellar. The cellar. That was the end of this confusing clue. Then I found out about the mysterious assistant and learned that he was one of London's most daring criminals. He was doing something in the cellar, something that took many hours every day for months. What could it be? The only thing I could think of was that he was digging a tunnel to another building. That's where I was when we visited the place. I surprised you by tapping on the pavement with my stick. I was figuring out if the cellar went forward or backward. It wasn't forward. Then I rang the bell, and, as I hoped, the assistant answered. We had fought before, but never seen each other. I barely looked at his face. I wanted to see his knees. You must have noticed how worn, wrinkled, and dirty they were. That told me he had been digging a lot. The only thing left to figure out was what he was digging for. I walked around the corner, saw the bank next to our friend's shop, and knew I had solved the mystery. After the concert, I visited Scotland Yard and the bank directors, and that's what happened. And how did you know they would attack tonight? When they closed the League office, it meant they didn't care about the pawnbroker's presence anymore. In other words, they had finished the tunnel, but they needed to use it soon because it could be discovered. Or the gold could be moved. Saturday would be the best day for them because they would have 2 days to escape. For all these reasons, I expected them tonight. You figured it out perfectly, I said, truly impressed. It's such a long chain, and every link fits together perfectly. It kept me from being bored, he said, yawning, but I'm already feeling bored again. I spend my whole life trying to escape the ordinary. These little problems help me do that. You're a hero, I said. He shrugged. Maybe it's useful after all, he said. Man is nothing. The work is everything. As Gustave Flaubert wrote to George Sand. The end. If you like the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.